Hi everyone. Today we are actually recording chapter 11. So what we're going to talk about today is managing human resource system. How do we manage the human resource system? Last week we had the last session was about the team. First session before that was around the individual. Now we're talking about how do we manage a system itself that actually is used to understand what we need. First and foremost, what we're looking at is the system looks something like this, right? It's a human resource system. So it's a computer system, right? So it's some kind of software, some kind of hardware, something is being run on a computer, and they have a thing inside it, and they're doing these things, planning, recruiting, selecting all these things that's going on, looking for qualified people to work there. So the human resource planning process, right? It's about supply and demand on one hand, and the human resource system on the other hand. Again, the system is just how you compile information and it's stored somewhere. Today's world, obviously, on a computer. Supply and demand, what are the internal factors that contribute to the workforce? What are the external factors that contribute to that workforce? We're going to take a look at that and we forecast it. Internal factors, you can just take a look at it, new position, all these things, that promotion, skill, education, current, will basically include why you need new people to work there. So you're forecasting that. External factor, demographic shift, geographic population shift, economic condition, unemployment rate, all these things will contribute to an external factor as to why you're looking for new people. Forecast methods. There are three different types of forecast method: direct, best guess, and a statistical historical ratio, which is basically just running some kind of tools. Usually, probably you guys might have heard of regression analysis or some other kind of software that just kind of predict and tell you, forecast what you're looking for. Best guess, managers just make an assessment of what they might or might not need and just get it. And direct managerial input, same thing, based on projections and forecasts of what you think you're going to make versus expenses. You might decide that you're going to add or subtract people from your department. The information system, as it says, a computerized system where you're putting information inside it based what you get from the employee. So whatever it is, service, decision making, transaction. System is storing things like personal data, work history, company employment history, and therefore. In terms of employment legislation, we're not going to cover most of these things. So I'll tell you exactly what we're going to cover. Basically, in federal laws, we're not going to take a look at that. We're going to focus more on adverse impact and employment discrimination and sexual harassment laws. So when we talk about adverse impact and discrimination, there are three areas that we're looking at. Two, we're going to focus on the most. The fourth, you can just kind of review it of your own. Disparate treatment, which intentional discrimination that results in equally qualified people being treated differently, and adverse impact, which is unintentional discrimination, basically for the same thing, for workers that are disadvantaged members of a protected group that are not treated equally. So again, two types we're going to focus on for the exam: disparate treatment and adverse impact. Sexual harassment is there are two areas. One, a quid pro quo, which employee outcomes depend on whether an individual submits to sexual harassment. And two, hostile work environment where unwelcome and demeaning sexual related behavior creates an intimidating and offensive work environment. So intimidating and work environment. So again, there are two areas for sexual harassment: quid pro quo, where on one hand, the employee do something in favor of sexual harassment; two, a style work environment where there's an unwelcome, demeaning sexual related behavior created in the workplace that are offensive and most time intimidating. Managerial mistakes in assuming that the victim and the harasser must be of the same sex, or must be of the opposite sex, sorry. Remember, we live in a world where that can be of the same sex. Harassment can only occur between co-workers and supervisors and subordinate, that only victims can file a complaint. So these three areas you have to be very careful of, because as managers, if you ever get into that position, and managers should know these things, that they're usually not the case, right? Anybody can file a complaint, and basically, in terms of the harassment, it can occur anyway. The company is responsible for making sure that they respond to immediately to sexual harassment. There's a clear outline, an understanding of what sexual harassment policies are, establish clear reporting procedures, and be in compliance with any federal law. Even though we're not going over federal law, they still need to be compliant with federal law. Finding qualified workers in terms of, so we go through recruiting. Recruiting comes in three different ways: job analysis and recruiting, external recruiting, and internal recruiting. So job analysis is just basically the information that you want the potential recruiter to know: tools, context, personal requirement for the job, all those things, work activities. Human resource management, so we'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of two different areas: job description and job specification. So the job analysis is, and recruiting, job description and job specification. Again, I'm assuming that if anyone of you inside this room have ever looked for a job, you have seen a job description and a job specification, and basically all there is just written description of the basic tasks, duties, and responsibility that the employee needs to have, or particular have some holding. That's a job description. And the job specification, again, is just a written description of the qualification needed to succeed in this job, in a particular job. Internal recruiting, again, that's just looking at pool of applicants that are already working at a company that you're going to pick from or can pick from. External recruiting, or just doing advertising, walk-in, employee services, internet job sites, different areas that you can go for external recruiting. So the internal recruiting is very specific in terms of somebody might give them a referral, or somewhere networking, lots of networking take place. Selection process in terms of application forms and resume, references and background checks, selection tests, and interviews. So all of these things, like I said, if you've been to a job, you kind of seen these things before. So intuitively, you should understand all of this. So again, reference check is just basically talking about the references, the background check. They're going to do that, make sure that what you say is true, and take a little bit deeper to learn more about you. Selection test is just giving you different type of tests that you might get from them once you get to a certain stage in the application process, where they can assess whether or not you're a good candidate. You might, in some cases, you might go through an interview, and there are three different types of interview processes: unstructured, structured, and semi-structured. All that means is that unstructured means that you're just there, they're talking, it's unflowing. Structured means that there's a specific steps and procedure that you prepare, that you go through, and the semi-structure is a combination of the both. Usually in structured interview, you get questions like situational questions, behavioral question, background question, job knowledge question. Which is pretty straightforward, right? Situation just asking you about what would you do in some kind of position where something's happening, and behavior is just how you behave relative to your coworkers or your boss. Background is just checking your background, and job is just making sure that you know the job basically and understand what you're looking for. In terms of the rest of the stuff, the rest is basically we won't go cover this planning the interview session, because most of this is on the other side, basically conducting. But after the interview, just remember that somebody has to send something out, determine each applicant probability of success. So all of this is being done by the company now after the interview is over. So from the worker standpoint, once you hire the workers, you're thinking of training, you're thinking of conducting need assessment. So training comes in three different ways: need assessment, training needs, training methods, and evaluation. So you're going through the assessment, identify performance deficiency, and see where they need certain skill sets and put training in place for that. Basically look how you're going to evaluate the training to make sure that you have the right approach to the training, you're doing the right things. Performance appraisal after you finish that performance appraisal a way to make sure that you measure job performance, share performance feedback. So that's basically what you're looking at in terms of three different ways that you can measure. And there are common errors that usually happens. One is, so three of them. One is the central tendency, where all workers, this is the company, the managers is basically looking at it from this way, and they're making errors in these areas. All workers are related as being average. Uh, so, and then the halo error, all workers are related to perform at the same level. And then lenience error, all workers are rated as performing at a high level. So you have to kind of get a sense of how companies view people. This is really hard for you to do anyway. You have to work hard and do your best to make sure that you can show them your best foot forward. But managers make these errors all the time because they just figure they're busy and they take the easy way out. Measuring performance, again, there are different ways in terms of trying to make sure that you can improve performance measurement in terms of how the appraisal looks like. You can there, so let's ignore these things. Some of these things you can ignore, but basically they rate the trainers in the company just to see how trainers are performing to get workers up to space. Performance feedback, managers are often basically giving employees performance feedback to make sure they can get up to speed. There are different ways of doing that. One in particular is what we call a 360 feedback, where the boss is giving feedback and the subordinate is giving feedback at the same time. So sharing performance feedback is very tricky, very technical. Make sure that you separate development feedback from administrative feedback, basically, because there's administrative feedback is not the same as, how do I want you to grow? Base performance appraisal session on a certain particular performance appraisal, self-appraisal. So again, just think about it that way. And people discuss the whole process with probably an executive coach, or other people can provide help for them. But again, sometimes the executive coach and all those things are at the higher level. At the lower level, you might not necessarily get a performance coach. So there are some areas of performance feedback you can actually look at. Problem you encounter, opportunities to improve, long-range plans and opportunities, general discussion for possible plans, and goal for next year, overall progress. So qualified workers, how do we try to keep them engaged and happy? We think of compensation, which is usually a good way. So compensation and employment benefits. So those are some common areas that you use to keep an employee, a current employee happy. There are different types of compensation level, there are pay level, pay variability, pay structure, employment benefits. These are some a brief description of what I mean by pay level decision, where job evaluation is used to determine the worth of the job. So pay the going rate. What do you mean by pay the going rate? So basically what the market rate is. Every company knows what the market that they're in, or the industry they're in, and they know the rate. So they will pay that rate. And then you can think of whether or not should the worker be paid below, above, or the current, and how does it affect or attract qualified workers, increase the rate of job applicant, decrease the time, all those things. So it all depends on how you're thinking about the applicant and what is in the best interest of the company. Pay variability is this decision in terms of how you pay them. There are different types. There are stock options, their employee stock ownership plan, their profit sharing plan, their commission, their piecework. All of these things you can make up your entire overall salary, depending on where you are in the corporation. Pay structure, how do you get paid from basically big difference between one pay level to another, right? So the higher up you're in the organization, the more likely you're going to get a lot more pay than the next person. Basically, so again, the same thing, compressed pay decision, there are two types. Fewer pay level with smaller differences in pay. So work best for interdependent work. So if you're in a group or stuff like that, this one might work best, but there are two ways, just for the exam purposes: hierarchical and compressed. Their employment benefits are lots of different type of employment benefits. So there's a compensation for your wage, and then there is social security, workers' compensation, unemployment, and other perks that you might get, like car allowance, cafeteria allowance, all these things that you might also get. Then at some point, somebody might need to leave the company. So there's employee separation, termination, downsizing, turnover, retirement. There are 4 different areas that you can actually leave the company. In terms of termination, basically, the argument is often mismanaged, but again, the role is to minimize the problem in firing the employees. Basically, think of it as a way to make sure that at the very least, this person can come back if they want. Firing should be done in private. Downsizing, again, this is the next way you're getting rid of a department, and so you have to lay off some people, still firing, basically, but you try to do it in a different way where you're train managers in how to tell employees, you provide outplacement services and counseling and communicate with people who leave. I don't word survivor just sounds a little bit harsh, but basically that's what it is. Incentive for you to leave early, offer financial incentive to basically many employees. Difficult to predict which or whom employers use the program. And sometimes you lose valuable people because they might see other people leaving and they might just take the package. There's employee turnover. Again, remember, people are going to leave, people are going to not leave, basically. So there's always employee turnover. The loss of something of the loss of poor employees, and then something of the loss of high performing employees. So these things happen basically, and that's basically it for chapter 11. So that is concludes our lecture on chapter 11. Okay, that concludes chapter 11. We will cover probably 12 and 13 next over the weekend. I'll send the rest to you, and you should have all 9 through 15 by Monday, so you can keep studying for the final. I am doing this on a Saturday, so enjoy the rest of your Saturday. It's beautiful out, and you'll probably see it next shortly. You'll see 2 more chapters. Thank you. Have a great time. Bye.